Tonight, you are invited to slow down, to leave behind the noise of the day, the weight of expectations, and the constant movement of the world. In this story, a man spends the night alone in a small cabin deep in the forest, surrounded by trees, quiet air, and the gentle rhythm of nature. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Simply get comfortable, take a slow breath, and allow this calm night in the woods to guide you softly toward rest. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of pine trees as Thomas made his way along the narrow forest path. His backpack sat comfortably on his shoulders, and with each step, the sounds of the distant highway faded further into memory. The air grew cooler and cleaner, carrying the scent of moss and evergreen needles. He had been walking for nearly 2 hours, leaving behind the small parking area where his car now sat, waiting for his return tomorrow. The cabin appeared gradually through the trees, exactly as the old photographs had shown. It was a simple structure of weathered wood, its timber walls silvered by countless seasons. A small porch stretched across the front, and a stone chimney rose from one side. The windows, though modest in size, caught the slanting sunlight and reflected the surrounding forest like mirrors. Thomas felt his shoulders relax as he approached. This was exactly what he had been seeking. He climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch, noting how they creaked gently beneath his weight. The sound was oddly welcoming, as if the cabin was acknowledging his presence. He retrieved the key from beneath a smooth river stone by the door, just as the caretaker had instructed, and unlocked the entrance. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing the simple interior. Inside, everything was clean and basic. A single room served as both living space and bedroom, with a small kitchenette tucked into one corner. A cast-iron stove stood near the center, its pipe extending up through the ceiling. Against the far wall, a narrow bed was neatly made, with a thick quilt in shades of forest green and deep blue. A wooden table and 2 chairs occupied the space near the window, and a few shelves held essentials: matches, candles, a kerosene lamp, and a small collection of books. Thomas set his backpack down and walked to the window. Through the glass, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions. The trees stood like silent witnesses to the passage of time, their trunks straight and strong, their branches swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. He could see no other buildings, no power lines, no signs of modern life. For the next 16 hours, he would be completely alone with the forest. He began to unpack slowly, taking his time with each item. From his bag, he removed a thermos of coffee, a few simple provisions for dinner and breakfast, a book he had been meaning to read for months, and a journal with a pen tucked into its spiral binding. He placed these items carefully on the table, arranging them in a way that felt right. There was no need to rush. Time here moved differently, or perhaps it was he who would move differently through time. The afternoon stretched ahead of him with a luxurious emptiness. Thomas decided to explore the immediate surroundings before the light began to fade. He stepped back outside, leaving the cabin door ajar, and walked the perimeter of the small clearing. The ground was soft with fallen needles, and here and there, small wildflowers pushed through the forest floor, their delicate petals white and yellow against the brown earth. Behind the cabin, he discovered a neatly stacked pile of firewood under a small shelter, protected from rain. The logs were dry and split perfectly for the stove. Beside the woodpile, an axe rested against the shelter wall, its handle worn smooth by many hands over many years. Thomas selected 3 logs and carried them back inside, placing them beside the stove for later. He found a small stream about 50 yards from the cabin, following the sound of trickling water through the trees. The stream was narrow enough to step across, its water clear and cold, flowing over smooth stones worn round by its persistent movement. Thomas knelt beside it and cupped his hands, bringing the water to his lips. It tasted of minerals and earth, clean and refreshing. He remained there for a moment, listening to the water's quiet song, watching how it caught the light and scattered it into dancing patterns. When he returned to the cabin, the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon. The light had taken on that golden quality peculiar to late afternoon, warm and somehow more substantial than the light of midday. Thomas poured himself a cup of coffee from his thermos and sat at the table by the window, simply watching as the forest prepared for evening. A bird landed on a branch near the window, a small creature with brown feathers and bright, curious eyes. It hopped along the branch, tilting its head this way and that, before flying off again into the deeper woods. Thomas smiled. He realized he had been holding tension in his jaw without knowing it, and he consciously relaxed, rolling his shoulders back and taking a deep breath. As the light continued to change, Thomas prepared a simple meal. He had brought a can of soup, some bread, cheese, and an apple. He lit one of the burners on the small propane stove in the kitchenette and heated the soup slowly, stirring it occasionally. The smell filled the cabin, mingling with the scent of wood and the faint mustiness that comes with places not occupied every day. It was a comforting combination. He ate his dinner at the table, chewing slowly, tasting each bite with more attention than he usually gave his meals. The soup was warm and salty, the bread hearty and dense, the cheese sharp on his tongue. The apple provided a crisp, sweet finish. He washed his dishes in a basin of water he had drawn from the pump outside, then dried them with a clean towel and put them away. Evening was settling over the forest now. Through the window, the trees had darkened to silhouettes, and the sky above them glowed with the last remnants of daylight, streaks of orange and pink fading into deep blue. Thomas knew it was time to light the lamp and perhaps start a fire in the stove. He removed the glass chimney from the kerosene lamp and lit the wick with a match, adjusting the flame until it burned steadily. The warm, golden light spread through the cabin, creating shadows that swayed gently whenever he moved. There was something deeply satisfying about this light, so different from the harsh, instant illumination of electric bulbs. This light seemed alive, breathing with the air in the room. Next, he opened the door of the cast-iron stove and arranged kindling inside, building a small structure with thin sticks and dried moss. He placed a fire starter in the center and lit it, watching as the flames caught and began to spread. Once the kindling was burning well, he added the first log, then another, adjusting the air vent to control the burn. Soon, the fire was crackling cheerfully, and heat began to radiate into the room. Thomas pulled one of the chairs closer to the stove and settled into it with his book. The evening had brought a coolness to the air, and the warmth from the fire felt good on his skin. He opened the book, a collection of essays about nature and solitude, and began to read by the combined light of the lamp and the fire's glow. The words on the page seemed to carry more weight here, each sentence settling into his mind with unusual clarity. He read about walking in woods, about the changing seasons, about the value of silence and the lessons of patience that the natural world offers to those who pay attention. Every so often, he would pause and lift his eyes from the page, listening to the sounds beyond the cabin walls. The forest at night had its own music. There were crickets singing their endless rhythms, their chirps rising and falling in waves. Occasionally, he heard the distant call of an owl, low and haunting, followed by silence, then answered by another owl farther away. The wind moved through the treetops with a sound like the ocean, a steady susurrus that formed a constant background to all other sounds. Thomas added another log to the fire and returned to his reading. Time passed without his notice. He could have been reading for 20 minutes or 2 hours, without the usual markers of time, without phones or schedules or appointments. The evening simply unfolded in its own way. When he finally closed the book, he realized his eyelids were growing heavy. He stood and stretched, raising his arms above his head and feeling the pleasant tiredness in his muscles from the day's walking. He went to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch. The night air was cool against his face, and he breathed it in deeply. Above, the sky was scattered with stars, more stars than he ever saw in the city. Brilliant points of light spread across the darkness like diamonds spilled across black velvet. He identified the Big Dipper, tracing its familiar shape with his eyes, then followed the pointer stars to find Polaris, the North Star, steadfast and unchanging. How many people throughout history had looked up at these same stars, he wondered. How many had stood in forests like this one, feeling small beneath the vastness of the universe, yet somehow connected to it all. A meteor streaked across the sky, a brief flash of light that appeared and vanished in an instant. Thomas smiled at the gift of having seen it. He remained on the porch for a while longer, listening to the night sounds, feeling the cool air on his skin, watching the stars slowly wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. When he finally went back inside, the cabin felt especially warm and welcoming. He closed the door quietly and checked the stove, adding one more log that would burn through the night, keeping the worst of the chill at bay. The fire had burned down to glowing coals with small flames licking around the new log. It would be enough. Thomas changed into comfortable clothes for sleeping, moving slowly and deliberately. He extinguished the kerosene lamp, but not before lighting a single candle and placing it on the small table beside the bed. The flame cast a soft, dancing light across the walls. He pulled back the quilt and slipped between the sheets, which felt crisp and cool at first, then began to warm with his body heat. He lay on his back, his head resting on the pillow, and simply breathed, in through his nose, out through his mouth. Long, slow breaths that seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the forest itself. His body began to relax completely, his muscles releasing their tension, his mind growing quiet. Through the window beside the bed, he could see fragments of the night sky. The stars continued their slow journey across the heavens. The wind whispered secrets to the trees. The cabin creaked occasionally, small sounds of wood settling, of a structure at rest. These sounds did not disturb him. Instead, they became part of the lullaby of the night. He thought about his life in the city, the constant noise and motion, the endless demands and distractions. Here, in this simple cabin, none of that existed. There was only this moment, this breath, this feeling of being held safely within the embrace of the forest. He felt grateful for the simplicity of it all. The candle flame swayed gently, casting moving shadows across the ceiling. Thomas watched it for a while, his eyelids growing heavier. He thought about how fire had comforted humans for thousands of years, how people had gathered around flames for warmth and light and companionship. Even alone, he did not feel lonely. The cabin, the forest, the night itself seemed to be companions of a sort. His thoughts began to drift, becoming less formed, more like dreams. He saw himself walking through the forest in dappled sunlight. He heard the stream flowing over stones. He felt the softness of moss beneath his fingers. These images floated through his mind like clouds across a summer sky, gentle and unhurried. The fire in the stove crackled softly. The wind outside rose slightly, then fell again. An owl called out, and this time Thomas heard it as if from a great distance, the sound weaving itself into the fabric of his descending consciousness. He was aware of the boundary between waking and sleeping, that threshold where thoughts dissolve into dreams, and he lingered there peacefully. His breathing had slowed and deepened. His body felt heavy against the mattress, pleasantly weighted, as if the earth itself was gently pulling him down into rest. The quilt cocooned him in warmth. The pillow cradled his head perfectly. Everything was exactly as it should be. He remembered something he had read earlier in the book, a line about how nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. The seasons change in their time. Seeds germinate when conditions are right. Trees grow slowly, adding one ring each year. There is wisdom in this patience, in trusting the natural unfolding of things. As he drifted closer to sleep, Thomas felt himself surrendering to this same trust, letting go of the need to control or force or hurry. The candle flame grew smaller in his vision, or perhaps his eyes were simply closing. Either way, the light became a warm point in the darkness, like a distant star, like a beacon guiding him gently toward the shore of sleep. His last conscious thought was one of simple contentment, a quiet recognition that he was safe, that he was exactly where he needed to be, that tomorrow would bring another day, but tonight was for rest. And then he was drifting, floating on warm currents of approaching sleep. The cabin held him safely. The forest breathed around him. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, and Thomas let go, surrendering to the deep, restorative peace of sleep in this quiet place, alone but not lonely, surrounded by the ancient, patient presence of trees and earth and sky. The night deepened around the cabin. Inside, the fire in the stove burned steadily, its glow visible through the small vents. The candle had finally gone out, leaving only darkness and the faint light of stars through the window. The man in the bed breathed slowly and evenly, deeply asleep, his face peaceful and relaxed. Outside, the forest continued its nocturnal life. Small creatures moved through the undergrowth. An owl hunted silently through the trees. The stream flowed endlessly over its bed of stones. The wind moved through branches, carrying with it the scents of pine and earth and the promise of morning still hours away. The cabin stood as it had stood for decades, a small haven of shelter and warmth in the vast wilderness. Inside, a single human being rested, his sleep deep and dreamless, the kind of sleep that heals and restores, the kind of sleep that can only come when the mind finally releases its grip on worry and planning, when the body recognizes that it is safe, when the spirit remembers its connection to something larger than itself. Hours passed. The stars moved across the sky in their eternal dance. The night grew colder, and the fire in the stove burned down to embers, still giving off heat. The man slept on, undisturbed, his breathing steady as the tide, his rest complete. In the morning, he would wake to birdsong and dawn light filtering through the trees. He would make coffee and breakfast. He would pack his things and begin the walk back to his car, carrying with him the memory of this night, this perfect stillness, this deep peace. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was only this: the cabin, the forest, the sleeping man, and the gentle passage of dark hours toward dawn. Everything else could wait. Everything else was far away. Here, now, there was only rest, only peace, only the quiet miracle of a single night spent alone in a cabin in the woods, surrounded by the timeless presence of nature, held safely in the arms of solitude and silence. The night continued. The forest breathed. The cabin stood. And inside, the man slept on deeply and peacefully, while the world turned slowly toward morning. As the night continues its quiet journey toward morning, everything begins to slow even further. The fire settles into warm embers. The forest breathes steadily, and the cabin rests, just as it has for many years. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to think about. If you are still awake, allow your breathing to soften. And if sleep has already found you, let it carry you gently through the rest of the night. Thank you for sharing this quiet time in the forest. May your sleep be deep, peaceful, and uninterrupted. Good night.